The conference room smelled like furniture polish and old paper when my stepmother looked across 9 relatives and laughed at me out loud. She did not smile the way she usually smiled in public, with the careful country club tilt of her chin and the strand of pearls she only wore when she wanted to be photographed. She laughed the way a woman laughs when she believes she has finally won something she has been quietly competing for since the day she met me. "Your father left you absolutely nothing," she said, her voice clear enough for the great aunt with the hearing aid to catch every word. "He hated you for 18 years, Ren. He told me himself on his deathbed that you were the single biggest regret of his entire life." I sat very still in the chair at the far end of the walnut table and felt my hands go cold. My grandmother flinched. It was a small movement that almost nobody else in the room would have noticed. A tightening of the shoulders under her cardigan, and a pressing of her folded handkerchief flat against the top of her thigh. She had been at the funeral home with my father's body 4 weeks earlier. She had read the medical records. She knew there had been no deathbed conversation, because she knew her son had never woken up after the stroke. She flinched because she had just heard her own daughter-in-law tell a lie about her son's death, and she had not yet decided whether this was the morning she was going to break 18 years of careful silence in front of 9 relatives. My cousin Delaney looked down at the carpet. The attorney did not move. Mr. Pendergrass, who had represented my family in 3 generations of estate work and had known my father since they were both young men, did not turn his head toward my stepmother, and did not turn it toward me. He reached into the folder in front of him, lifted out a smaller brown envelope I had not noticed before, and set it on the table. The envelope was sealed with a disc of red wax. My father's name was pressed into the wax in raised letters from a signet he had owned since college. Mr. Pendergrass broke the seal with the edge of his thumbnail in a single quiet motion. He unfolded the first page, read only the opening line in silence, and then slid the envelope across the polished walnut surface toward me without saying a single word about what it contained. My Uncle Beckett, who had not spoken to me in 13 years and had been sitting in the assigned seat directly beside mine because my stepmother loved the cruelty of geography, leaned half an inch closer and whispered into the side of my hair. "Open it," he said, "but not in front of her. If you do, she will never recover." I lifted the envelope. I did not look at my stepmother. I stood up from the chair, picked up my handbag from the floor, and walked out of the conference room without saying goodbye to anyone. Not the grandmother who had flinched, and not the cousin who had looked at the carpet, and not the stepbrother who had been studying his coffee cup like it contained instructions. My uncle followed me out into the hallway with his hat already in his hand. "If you are still here with me, I need to ask you something before I keep going. Because what you just watched in that conference room is the kind of moment that most people never see and never forget once they do. Please subscribe to the channel right now so the next story finds you when you need it most. And down in the comments, tell me about a time someone you loved made you feel small in front of a room full of people who chose not to defend you. You do not have to share the whole story. 1 sentence is enough. Those sentences become a small light for thousands of strangers who think they are the only ones who ever survived a room like that. In the gold-framed mirror by the elevator, I caught the reflection of my stepmother still seated at the head of the table behind us. The smile was still on her mouth, the way a price tag is still on a piece of furniture nobody has bought yet. But it was no longer reaching her eyes, and the way her lawyer was leaning toward her to whisper something told me she had not expected my exit. I had arrived at the law office that morning at 9:52, after parking in the deck across College Street and walking the half-block slowly, because I did not want to be early and did not want to be late. She had arrived at 9:30. The paralegal had told me that in such a carefully neutral tone that I had immediately understood she was warning me on purpose. The firm of Pendergrass and Vale had occupied the same 3-story red brick building on Pack Square in downtown Asheville since the early 1960s, and my family had been clients almost from the beginning. My great-grandfather had hired the founding partner to set up the original family trust the year my father was born, and my grandfather had used the firm to settle his own estate in 1991, the same year my father, at 27 years old, had become the man of our small, careful family. The office smelled the way I remembered offices smelling when I was a child, like old varnish and warm copper lamps, and the slow patience of people who measure time in decades rather than appointments. Atticus Pendergrass had been my father's attorney for 35 years. He had never once been my stepmother's. To understand why a woman in pearls would stand up in a wood-paneled conference room and say the cruelest possible sentence to her dead husband's daughter, you have to understand the 18 years she spent saying smaller versions of the same sentence in private. My father married Celeste in June of 2008, in a small garden ceremony in the backyard of our house in Biltmore Forest, which is the old money neighborhood south of Asheville, where people pour you sweet tea while they say cruel things in soft voices. I was 9 years old at the wedding. I wore a flowered dress Celeste had picked out at a boutique on Wall Street and told my father was the dress I had chosen. I had chosen a different one. I had already learned, at 9, that arguing about clothes was not worth the conversation that would follow it. During the reception, while my father was being congratulated near the rose trellis by a row of his co-workers from the Department of Transportation, Celeste knelt down beside me on the brick patio in her white silk shoes. She was 38 years old, beautiful in the careful, hard way of women who never let a single hair fall out of place, and she put one manicured hand on my shoulder and bent down until her eyes were exactly level with mine. "Sweetheart," she said in a voice soft enough that no adult could possibly have heard her, "I am not trying to be your mother, but your father needs us both to take care of him now. He gets very sad sometimes when he thinks about you, so when he gets quiet, that is because of you, okay? Just be very good." I nodded. Her son Holden was watching us from the cake table. He was 14. He was not smiling. That night, after the guests had finally gone home, and my father had collapsed onto the couch in his rumpled tuxedo shirt, and Celeste had gone upstairs to take off her makeup, I sat on the edge of my pink quilted bedspread with a stack of construction paper and a marker. I wrote a card in the careful block printing I had just learned at school. "Dear Dad, I am sorry I make you sad sometimes. I will be better. Love, Ren." I folded the card in half, sealed it inside an envelope with a sticker of a strawberry on the flap, and walked it down the dark hallway to the kitchen counter, so my father would find it in the morning when he made coffee. 18 years later, I would find that exact envelope, still sealed, still unopened, in a cardboard box on a metal shelf in my stepmother's basement. My father never saw the card. That was the first lie, and it set the shape of every lie that came after it. Some of the lies were spoken aloud at dinner tables. Some were quietly taken from me when nobody was watching. Some were forged. My father worked as a senior civil engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and his job required him to spend somewhere between 6 and 10 days of every month on inspection trips to bridges and overpasses across the western half of the state. From 2010 until 2016, on every single trip, he mailed me a handwritten letter from his hotel. I know this now because Atticus Pendergrass keeps a small folder in his office containing 12 envelopes that my father recovered from the kitchen trash, the bottom of a junk drawer, and the inside of a phone book in the hallway cabinet over the course of 3 years. Each envelope was addressed to me in my father's neat engineering hand. Each envelope had been carefully opened along the top fold and then resealed by someone who clearly did not know how steam works. In the entire 18 years between my 9th birthday and my father's death, I received exactly 3 letters from him in my own hands. All 3 of them arrived during the specific weeks when my stepmother had been out of town visiting her sister in Charleston. I would learn much later, when Atticus showed me the correspondence file my father had kept under lock and key at the firm, that my father had also been writing replies to letters I had never written him, because Celeste had been mailing him forged cards from me on every birthday for years. He had no way of knowing the cards were not from me. He had wanted them so badly to be from me. There were other patterns that took shape inside the house in Biltmore Forest, woven so carefully into the wallpaper of ordinary life that I did not notice them for years. My stepbrother Holden, who was 6 years older than me, and had come into the marriage as Celeste's son from her first marriage, had always been positioned by his mother as the favored child, without ever being formally adopted by my father. I did not learn that my father had never adopted Holden until I was 23 years old, when a tax form arrived at my apartment in West Asheville, addressed to the parent or guardian of Holden Ashby. He had always simply been Celeste's. in a way that meant her loyalty to him would never be divided. But he had been coached carefully from boyhood, the way attorneys coach witnesses, on what to say to my father about me. When I was 11 years old, Holden came into the kitchen one afternoon while I was making a peanut butter sandwich, soccer ball tucked under his arm, his expression arranged into something I have never been able to describe properly, except to say it looked rehearsed. "Dad told Mom you said you wished he had died instead of your real mom," he told me, almost casually, the way you would report the weather. He said he cried about it. I heard him through the wall. I had not said that. I had not even thought it. The sentence got inside me before I could put up any defense against it, the way cold water gets inside a coat before you can pull it closed. 2 weeks later, my father came into my bedroom and sat down on the edge of my bed in the careful way men sit when they have rehearsed a question. "Sweetheart," he said in a voice that was trying very hard to be gentle, "do you ever wish your mom had stayed instead of me?" He had never asked me a question even close to that one, and I was so bewildered by it that the only word I could find in my 11-year-old vocabulary was the word sometimes. What I meant by sometimes was that sometimes I missed her so much that the missing leaked into ordinary moments. What he heard was that sometimes I wished he had died instead of her. He nodded once, very slowly, and stood up from the edge of my bed, and walked out of my room, and closed the door behind him with the particular care of a man trying not to slam it. He did not call me sweetheart again for almost 4 years. I did not know how to ask him why. When I was 16 years old, on an ordinary Saturday in April of 2015, my stepmother came into my bedroom carrying a folded sheet of yellowed paper that she said she had found at the bottom of a shoebox in the basement while sorting through old things. She told me, in a voice carefully arranged to sound reluctant, that she had been afraid to open it for years, but that she thought I deserved to read it now that I was old enough. The paper was thin, yellowed at the edges, in the way old paper goes yellow when it has been sitting in a damp basement. The handwriting was round and looping, and looked like my mother's handwriting in the few birthday cards I still owned. The date at the top of the page was September of 2006, 3 days before my mother had taken her own life. I read the letter once standing up in my bedroom, and then I sat down on the floor and read it a second time, and then I read it a third time, and then I read it for the next 11 years of my life. I will tell you exactly what the letter said later in this story, when the timing is right, because the letter deserves to be heard at the moment I learned the truth about it. For now, all you need to know is that for 11 full years, from 16 years old until I was 27, I believed my mother had taken her own life, partly because my father had not loved her enough, and partly because she had not believed he could ever love me either. That was the deepest, oldest lie my stepmother ever told me. Every other lie was just architecture built around that one. There was also the matter of money, which my stepmother had moved with the same patient skill she used on everything else. My father had opened a UTMA, which is a small custodial investment account for children, in my name on my 5th birthday, and he had funded it carefully every quarter for the first 12 years of my life. After he married Celeste, she gradually became the de facto financial manager of the household, the one who reconciled the statements and signed the routine paperwork, the one whose handwriting the bank tellers got used to seeing on family documents. Between 2010 and 2015, 9 separate withdrawal slips were filed against my custodial account, totaling $42,800. Every signature line on every slip read T. Hollister. The handwriting did not. I was a public school student. I had never seen a single dollar of that money. My Uncle Beckett did not say anything to me in the hallway outside the elevator. He simply held the door open with the brim of his hat and waited for me to step inside, and we rode down to the lobby in a silence so dense it had its own weight. When we reached the parking deck across College Street, he led me to a Toyota Tacoma I recognized instantly, without being told why. It was a 2014 model, the same year, and the same dark gray color as the truck my father had driven for the last decade of his life, and I understood without asking that this was not a coincidence. "There is a diner on Haywood," Beckett said finally, opening the passenger door for me, with the careful courtesy of a man who had been raised by women. "The coffee is bad, and the booths are private. I would like to buy you breakfast." He did not turn the radio on during the 8-minute drive. I did not look out the window. When we slid into a back booth at the diner, and the waitress came over with 2 laminated menus, Beckett pushed both menus to the edge of the table without opening them. He set his hands flat on the formica, looked at me across the table, and did not look away. In July of 2013, he said quietly, "Your father asked me to come over to the house and help him clean out the basement before a contractor came to look at the foundation. He was upstairs in the kitchen making sandwiches. I went down into the basement alone. I came around the back of the metal storage shelving where the holiday boxes were kept, and I saw your stepmother sitting at a card table with the lid off your mother's memory box." He paused long enough for me to feel the next sentence before he said it. "She had your mother's letter, the real one, the original sheet of paper, in her left hand," he said. "She had a blank piece of yellowed paper on the card table in front of her. She was copying the letter slowly, line by line, tracing the curve of the handwriting with a fountain pen, so the new letters would match. I stood behind the shelving and watched her for 40 seconds. I almost said something kind to her at first, because I genuinely thought for a moment that she was missing your mother in some twisted private way and was trying to keep her handwriting alive. Then I leaned a little closer, and I read what she was actually writing on the new page. It was not what your mother had written. I held my coffee cup with both hands. I did not lift it to my mouth. The diner around us had stopped existing in any real way, narrowed down to the formica table and the quiet, steady voice of the man across it. "I went back up the basement stairs without saying anything," Beckett said. "I sat at the kitchen table with your father and ate one of the sandwiches he had made and listened to him talk about a bridge project in Ashboro. I did not tell him that night, and I have hated myself for that for 13 years. I told him exactly 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, when he came over to my house to help me replace a water heater. He did not look surprised when I told him what I had seen. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been quietly waiting for somebody else to confirm what he had already begun to suspect. I asked what my father had said when Beckett finally told him. He asked me to give him time, Beckett said. He said if he confronted her in that moment, with nothing but my eyewitness statement to back him up, she would simply burn every piece of paper in the house overnight, and he would never be able to prove a single thing he had begun to suspect about her. He said he was going to make sure you had every single door you could possibly need, standing open in front of you, before he opened the one door that would hurt the most. Your father, who had never knelt for anyone in his entire life, knelt down on the white kitchen tiles of my house that afternoon and asked me to give him time. He used the words, 'Let me finish being her father.' I said okay. I have not used the word okay the same way since. I asked why he had stopped speaking to me when I was 14 years old, why he had vanished from family events, why he had stopped sending birthday cards, why every Thanksgiving I had spent the entire meal feeling the empty chair across from me. Because the only way I could keep my promise to your father, he said, was to stay so far away from you that I could never slip and say something I could not take back. If I had been around you at all, I would have told you. Your father knew that about me. He arranged us into separate orbits on purpose, and I let him do it because I was afraid I would ruin the case he was trying to build. That is the part I have to live with for the rest of my life." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and set a small envelope on the formica between us, smaller than the one Mr. Pendergrass had given me, about the size of my palm. He pushed it across the table with 2 fingers. "Your father gave me this 6 years ago," Beckett said. "He told me that if anything happened to him before you knew the truth, I was to make sure you could still get inside without having to ask her for permission." I opened the small envelope with the same careful fingers I had used on the brown one back in the conference room. Inside was a single silver house key with a short strip of red electrical tape wrapped tightly around the bow. The red was the exact shade of red my father had always used to mark up his engineering plans. "It is the cabin," Beckett said quietly. "The one up in Black Mountain. There is a second lock on the front door now. She does not have a key to it. Only I do, and now you do." I closed my hand around the key and felt the warm metal press into my palm. I drove home to my apartment in West Asheville that afternoon, with the brown envelope sitting in my passenger seat and the silver key zipped into the small pocket inside my purse, where I usually kept emergency cash. My apartment is small, One bedroom. The kitchen counter has a chip on the corner from a moving box that fell 6 years ago, and the lighting is good. I set the brown envelope down on the counter, set the silver key beside it, and made a pot of tea that I forgot to drink. I sat on the stool with my elbows on the chipped corner and looked at the envelope for almost 40 minutes before I touched it. Then I broke the rest of the wax seal that Mr. Pendergrass had only partially cracked, and I unfolded the pages inside. There were 4 pages of plain white printer paper, covered in my father's neat engineering block print. Underneath the pages was a small stack of documents bound with a black binder clip, each one tagged with a small colored adhesive flag labeled in his handwriting, A through G. I read the letter to me first. The opening line was not addressed to me at all, however. It was addressed to Mr. Pendergrass, in a single sentence at the top of the first page that read, "Counsel, please do not read this aloud in the same room as my wife." That single sentence explained everything about how the envelope had been delivered. That was the reason Mr. Pendergrass had read only the first line in silence, before sliding the envelope across the walnut table. My father had not just written a letter. He had written stage directions for the lawyer to follow, because he had known that the woman across the table from me would weaponize anything she heard. The letter to me began on the second paragraph of the first page. "Wren," my father had written, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come down to Pack Square to learn what I left behind for you. I expect the room you open this envelope in to be full of people who have a confident opinion about what I owed you and what I did not. I would like you to ignore all of them, including the ones you love, and read what comes next at your own speed, in your own time, without anyone else in the room. In the summer of 2013, your uncle told me what he had seen your stepmother do in our basement. From that day forward, I worked toward this envelope. I am sorry it had to be an envelope at all. I would have very much preferred to say all of this to you across a dinner table. I would have preferred a great many things." He listed the rest of the letter the way he had always listed everything in his professional life, like a project schedule with a column for the date and a column for the action. The trust in 2018, the cabin deed transfer in 2020, the safe deposit box at First Citizens, the forensic graphologist hired in 2023 to authenticate the UTMA slips, the affidavit he had signed in his attorney's office in September of 2024, 4 months before the stroke that killed him. He explained each instrument in the flat, unemotional engineering language he had used to write inspection reports for 40 years. He told me where every original document was stored. He told me what Mr. Pendergrass had been instructed to do at the will reading and at the second meeting that would follow. He told me which family members had been quietly recruited to help him without telling me, and which had been kept entirely in the dark. The final paragraph of the letter was the shortest. "I tried in every way I knew how to reach you," my father had written. "I did not always know what was being said in my name, and I did not always know what was being said to you in mine. I hope you will forgive me for not understanding sooner than I did. You did not lose me at any point in the last 18 years. I was always here. Please read this when you are ready, not before. Dad." September the 18th, 2024. He had never once used the word love in any letter he had ever written to me. He had not been the kind of man who used that word in print, and I had spent 11 years interpreting that absence as evidence against him. The way he had said love, instead, in this letter, was the sentence I worked toward this envelope. I put the letter down on the chipped counter and pulled the small stack of tab documents toward me. Tab A was a certification of irrevocable trust dated November the 4th, 2018. Beneficiary Wren Marin Hollister. Corpus $1,285,000. Tab B was a recorded warranty deed for the Black Mountain property. Recorded April 21st, 2020. In Buncombe County. Grantor Theodore Hollister, sole grantee, Wren M. Hollister. Tab C was a small silver key labeled First Citizens Pack Square Branch, box number 2018. Tab D was a manila folder containing 6 envelopes postmarked between 2010 and 2016, seals visibly altered. Tab E was a UTMA withdrawal audit listing 9 separate slips totaling $42,800. Tab F was an affidavit my father had signed in his lawyer's office. Tab G simply said, "To be opened only with counsel present." I did not open Tab G that night. because he had specifically asked me not to, and I had spent so many years failing him on the basis of misunderstandings that I was not going to fail him again on the basis of impatience. Instead, I lifted the binder clip and noticed something I had almost missed, tucked into the back pocket of the folder behind tab G. It was a Polaroid photograph I had never seen before in my life. The image showed me at 11 years old, sitting on the wooden front steps of the cabin in Black Mountain, hair falling across my face, laughing at something happening just outside the frame. I was eating a peanut butter cracker out of a small plastic baggie. The photograph was slightly faded in the corners the way Polaroids fade over time. On the back, in my father's careful block printing, were the words Ren, age 11, cabin. She is okay. That was the sentence that broke me. Not the trust, not the deed, not the 7-figure number printed at the top of the trust certification. The 4 words on the back of a Polaroid he had carried in his wallet for 16 years. She is okay. He had thought it, and he had needed to write it down, and he had kept it in an envelope for the next 16 years of his life, so that one day, if everything went wrong, I would have hard physical proof that at least one afternoon in the year 1999, somebody who genuinely loved me had looked at me across a yard in Black Mountain and known I was all right. I held the photograph for a long time before I slid it carefully back into the folder. The kettle on the stove had whistled and gone quiet again. I did not get up to pour it. If your father ever wrote a sentence about you that you did not know existed until after he was gone, I want you to drop the word envelope down in the comments of this video, because I am genuinely curious how many of us are out here in the dark, carrying letters we did not know our fathers had been writing. While you are there, please subscribe so the second half of this story finds you. The most important part has not happened yet. The biggest piece of what my father built is still sitting unopened on my counter, and the woman who spent 18 years writing his side of the story for him is about to find out exactly how much of the truth has been quietly waiting underneath her feet the entire time. Celeste was not the kind of woman who allowed an envelope to sit on a kitchen counter unanswered for very long. The first voicemail arrived at 4:11 on the same afternoon as the will reading, and her voice on the recording was so sweet, it almost did not sound like her. She wanted to know if I was okay. She thought it would be good for the two of us to sit down somewhere quiet and talk through the misunderstanding that had unfortunately developed in the conference room. She left her name and her phone number at the end of the message, which she had not done in any voicemail since I had left for college. And the precision of that small detail was the first warning that she had already moved past sweetness and into strategy. The second voicemail came at 7 that evening. The sweetness had thinned considerably. By the third afternoon, she was making careful references to my late mother in a way that was meant to sound nostalgic, and instead came across as a low warning. By the fourth afternoon, she had moved on to making references to my Uncle Beckett, suggesting in a voice carefully arranged into concern that I should consider very carefully which version of certain events I chose to believe. "Ren, sweetheart," she said in one message I saved, "I would consider very seriously whose word you are trusting right now. There are reasons your uncle stopped being welcome at family events that you were too young to understand, and I am not going to put them in a voicemail, but you should know that he lost his engineering license in 2013 over an incident involving a younger woman. That was a complete fabrication. Beckett had never lost a license. His record was clean. But it was a useful fabrication for her, because if I started to trust him, she needed me to second-guess everything he said. I did not call her back. I did not answer a single one of her calls. I saved each voicemail in a labeled folder on my phone titled Evidence C, and I forwarded copies of every one of them to Mr. Pendergrass. On the morning of the second day, my cousin Delaney sent me a private text message. Delaney is 2 years older than me, and we had never been close, in part because she had been polite at every family gathering, but had never once stood up for me when her aunt mocked me at the holiday table. I had long since stopped expecting that kindness from anyone in that family. Her text was short and apologetic. "Ren," she wrote, "I am so sorry. I need to show you something." What she sent me was a screenshot of a group text labeled Hollister Family. There were 8 people in the group, and I had never been one of them. The message history scrolled back over 13 years. She forwarded a single message Celeste had sent to the group on the night of the will reading. "Family, The message read, "Please understand that Ren has been struggling emotionally for years. Theodore and I tried for so long to help her, and what happened today in the lawyer's office is a misunderstanding driven by her grief and her instability. Cornelius is simply doing what he is paid to do. I will sort it. Please do not engage with her directly until I have had a chance to speak with her myself." There were 2 heart emojis from my Aunt Lorraine. There was no response of any kind from my grandmother. There were 3 thumbs up from various cousins. Delaney sent a second message immediately after the screenshot. "I am so sorry," she wrote. "I will testify against her in any legal proceeding you want me to." I read both messages twice, and then I typed back a thank you that was both shorter and warmer than I had intended it to be. I did not ask her why she had waited until now to send me anything. I already knew the answer. People do not break the silence inside a family until they are absolutely certain the family is going to break first, because the cost of breaking the silence too early is being cast out alone. On the 3rd evening, my stepbrother Holden showed up at my apartment without warning. He stood on the small concrete landing outside my front door, with both of his hands jammed into the pockets of a wool coat. He did not try to come inside. "I did not know," he said immediately, before I had even fully opened the door. "I know that is the sentence everyone says when they have been on the wrong side of something, and I know it does not mean much coming out of my mouth. But I want you to know that I did not know about the letters. I did not know about the trust. I did not know she had taken money out of your account. I knew my mother said things about you when you were not in the room. I knew she said things to you when nobody else was listening. I let her say them, and I did not say anything back. I am not asking you to forgive any of that. And I am not going to be at the second meeting on Saturday, whatever that is worth to you." Then he took something small and wooden out of his coat pocket. It was a tiny carved horse, painted dark brown, the saddle worn pale along the top, where small hands had once rubbed the paint away. My father had carved that horse for me out of a piece of black walnut on my 6th birthday, and I had not laid eyes on it since I was 7, because Celeste had told me very calmly that I must have lost it during the move from the old house to the new one in Biltmore Forest. "I found this in the basement 2 years ago," Holden said quietly, looking at the horse instead of looking at me. "I should have given it to you then. I am giving it to you now." He set the horse down carefully on the concrete landing between us, the way you might set down a thing you do not feel you have the right to hand to a person directly. Then he turned around and walked back down the stairs to his car. I held the wooden horse in my palm for nearly 20 minutes before I went inside and set it on the shelf above my kitchen counter, where it could see the brown envelope and the silver key. On the 4th afternoon, my grandmother called me. Augusta was 84 years old, and I had not heard her voice on a phone line in 3 years. The call came at exactly 3 o'clock, which was the time of day my father had always called her every Sunday for the last 26 years of his adult life. "Theodore called me every single Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon," she told me, her voice steady, but slightly slower than I remembered it. "He always asked me the same question, every single week. 'Has Ren called you, Mom?' I always told him I would tell you he had asked. I never told you. I thought it was easier. I was wrong. 'I would like to meet with you,' she said, 'when you are ready, but not before, and not because anyone has pressured you.' She did not cry while she said any of it. She did not apologize exactly. She did not ask me to forgive her for any of the Sundays. She simply told me what had been happening in those calls, and then she waited for me to decide what I wanted to do with the information. I told her I would come see her at the house when I was ready. After we hung up, I walked into my small bathroom and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at my own face. Celeste had not understood, when she chose to mock me at the conference room table, that the brown envelope was not the only envelope. There were envelopes everywhere now, arriving in different forms. The lie was not just unraveling, the people who had been folded inside it were unfolding too. Mr. Pendergrass called me on Saturday morning and asked me to come into the office the following Tuesday afternoon for a long private walkthrough of every document in the folder, without my stepmother present. He wanted to explain each instrument in detail before the second formal meeting was held in the conference room. Beckett picked me up that Tuesday and drove me to Pack Square. We sat together in 2 chairs facing the lawyer's broad oak desk. with a black and white photograph hanging on the wall behind him that I had never seen before. A wedding day picture of my father and my mother from 2002. My mother was laughing in the photograph. My father was looking at her instead of at the camera. Mr. Pendergrass had taken the photograph himself, as a friend at their wedding, and had kept it on his wall for 24 years. He laid the trust paperwork out in front of me first, and explained it slowly, in language a person without a law degree could follow. An irrevocable trust, he said, is a legal entity separate from your father. On November the 4th, 2018, the day he funded it in this office, the assets inside it ceased to be his. He could not give them to your stepmother after that day. He could not change his mind. He could not take them back even if he had wanted to. He chose to put them beyond his own reach, so that nobody could ever take them away from you. The trust is not subject to the will. The will is, in legal terms, what your father wanted Mrs. Hollister to see. The trust is what he actually built for you. He explained the deed next, using the email my father had sent her in 2022, refusing to take a second mortgage on the cabin. That property is not on the table, my father had written. Please do not raise it again. The reply was a single sentence on a printed page that Mr. Pendergrass slid across the desk for me to read. Your father knew by 2022 that he had at most 3 years left, the attorney said quietly. He had been diagnosed with the cardiac condition that would eventually kill him. He had told only his cardiologist and me. He moved much faster on his preparations after that diagnosis. I had not known my father had been sick at all. He had never told me, and he had never told Celeste either. He had told 2 people in the world, and built the architecture of my protection at increased speed without telling anyone in his household. Mr. Pendergrass then brought out the second folder, the slim, hardbound one that had been sitting at the corner of his desk, and laid 3 documents on the table. Before we open tab G, he said, I need you to see something separate. Your stepmother has stated twice now, once at the will reading and once in a voicemail my paralegal received yesterday afternoon, that your father spoke to her in his final hours. I have here the Mission Hospital admission record from February the 5th, the Asheville Fire Rescue run sheet from that same morning, and the attending physician's note. Your father was unresponsive from the moment of the stroke onward. His Glasgow coma scale was 3 at the scene. He never regained consciousness. He could not have told anyone anything. The medical record does not support what she has been saying. I will preserve these records, and you will decide whether to introduce them into any future proceeding. I closed the folder without needing to read any further, because I knew in that moment exactly what I was going to do with it, and I had decided to wait. That night, alone in my apartment with the kettle whistling and going quiet again on the back burner, I sat at the chipped kitchen counter under the lamp and finally laid the 2 letters side by side on the wood. The letter on my left was the one I had carried inside me for 11 years. The yellowed sheet of looping handwriting that Celeste had pressed into my 16-year-old hands on a Saturday afternoon in April of 2015, with a careful look of reluctant sorrow on her face. The letter on my right was tab G. I opened the tab folder slowly. Inside were 3 documents, layered in the careful order my father had arranged them. The first was a sworn affidavit my father had signed on September the 18th, 2024, stating under penalty of perjury that he had personally observed his wife replace the original of my mother's final letter with a forgery she had drafted in the summer of 2013. The second document was a sworn affidavit from Dr. Iris Mendelsohn, who had been my mother's psychiatrist for the 3 years before her death and had remained, I now learned, a quiet correspondent of my father's for the 18 years after it. Her affidavit was dated 4 days after his, in late September of 2024. It stated that on September the 11th, 26, during what would become my mother's final session, my mother had written a letter to her young daughter on the desk in Dr. Mendelsohn's office and had read the letter aloud to her before sealing it. The letter, she swore, had explicitly stated that my mother's decision was a function of an untreated illness she had been carrying since her late teens, and that the decision had nothing to do with the inadequacy of her husband or the inadequacy of her child. The letter she had personally witnessed bore no resemblance to the document my father had been shown years later. The third document was a single sheet of paper, more brittle than any of the others, with a quality of age that no 2011 manufactured paper could imitate. The handwriting was shaky in the way the handwriting of a deeply ill person is shaky, and the letter was only 7 lines long. "My Wren," my mother had written, "I am so tired and I do not know how to make it stop. This is not your father's fault. He has been kind. This is not your fault either. You are 7 years old and you are perfect. I have been sick for a very long time, longer than you have been alive. Take care of him for me, baby girl. Mom." I put the letter down on the counter very slowly, the way you put down a thing that might shatter, and I sat very still for what turned out to be a little over an hour. I had been reading the wrong letter for 11 years of my life. The kettle had whistled and gone quiet twice. My phone had buzzed somewhere in the next room and I had not heard it. The lamp had gotten warm underneath my open palm. I thought, sitting there, about how my mother had been 25 years old when I was born, and only 32 on the day she died. I thought about how I was now, at 27, already 5 years older than she had ever managed to become. I thought about how she had spent her final hour writing by hand, in the careful presence of a witness, the sentence "he has been kind." I thought about my father reading the forged version of that letter for the first time in the summer of 2013, and choosing not to tell me, because he could not yet prove what he knew. I thought about the 11 years I had spent flinching whenever he tried to put a hand on my shoulder. The 11 years I had spent letting his phone calls go unanswered to voicemail. The 11 years I had spent silently believing he had loved my mother less than she deserved, and had loved me less than I deserved. He had been the second person in my life who genuinely loved me, and I had grieved him while he was still walking around alive in the same city as me. The forged letter was the worst thing Celeste had ever done, because she had not just stolen my father from me, she had stolen the way I was allowed to remember my mother. I understood, sitting there at the counter, exactly what Beckett had whispered to me in the conference room. He had not been talking about her pride. He had been talking about the room itself. The second formal meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning that following Saturday, in the same conference room with the same 9 relatives. Mr. Pendergrass had requested everyone be present, and he had informed Celeste's attorney, a young man from Charlotte named Mr. Whitfield, who did not know Asheville and did not know how Buncombe County moved, that there would be additional documentation introduced on the record. He had not described what. Celeste arrived at 9:40 with Mr. Whitfield in tow, wearing a different strand of pearls than she had worn at the first meeting. I arrived at 9:58 and took the chair directly to the right of Mr. Pendergrass, this time on the opposite end of the table from where I had been seated before. Beckett took the chair to my left. My grandmother walked in at exactly 10 o'clock without the green handkerchief in her lap, sat down across from her daughter-in-law, and did not look away. "This meeting is on the record," Mr. Pendergrass said. "Mrs. Hollister's counsel has requested a discussion of certain documents, and Miss Hollister's counsel, myself, has agreed. I will read each instrument in order, in a level voice, without editorializing. Each party may speak after I have finished reading." He began with the trust certification, reading it slowly, page by page, naming the date, and the corpus, and the beneficiary, and the co-trustees, and the notary, and the witness on the signature page. He used the same flat, measured voice he had used 3 weeks earlier to read the will itself. Celeste interrupted him twice. He waited patiently each time, and resumed reading from the exact word at which he had been cut off. The third time she interrupted, she stood up from her chair entirely. "That cannot be valid," she said, her voice climbing into a register I had never heard her use in front of family before. "Theodore would have told me about this. He would never have done something this large without telling me," she said. "This is a forgery of some kind. This is not real." "Mrs. Hollister," Mr. Pendergrass said in the same level voice, "the trust was signed in this office on November the 4th, 2018, witnessed by my partner Mr. Vale, notarized by Ms. Caldwell, who is still employed by this firm, and available to testify. It is irrevocable. It is not part of the probate estate. It is not subject to your objection or your consent." He moved next to the cabin deed, and read the recording stamp from Buncombe County aloud, book number and page number and date. He laid the printed email from March of 2022 on the table beside it, the one in which my father had refused to put the cabin on the table. Celeste's hand pressed flat against the polished wood. She did not look at her own attorney. He did not look at her either. Mr. Pendergrass laid the 6 envelopes from tab D out across the table next, each one postmarked between 2010 and 2016, each one with the visible alteration along the seal where steam had once been applied. These envelopes were addressed to Miss Hollister between the years marked, he said, and were recovered from Mr. Hollister's safety deposit box, where he had kept them since the year he intercepted the first one returning to him. He had not destroyed them. I quote his note from the box, because she may not believe me without seeing the original handwriting. My cousin Tate, who is Beckett's only son and 35 years old, stood up from his chair without saying a single word. He walked out of the conference room, and he did not come back. Celeste had been the one who had cared for Tate during the summer he was 10 years old, after his mother's surgery. He had loved her once. He did not love her anymore. Mr. Pendergrass placed the 9 UTMA withdrawal slips on the table next, and laid the forensic graphologist's report beside them. He read the conclusion in his level voice. All 9 signatures are inconsistent with Mr. Hollister's verified hand. 7 of the 9 show characteristics consistent with the hand of Mrs. Hollister. The total amount withdrawn from the minor's custodial account between 2010 and 2015 is $42,800. The minor never received any portion of these funds. Celeste said nothing. He moved to the letters. I will not read either letter aloud, he said, looking up for the first time, and meeting my eyes briefly before returning his attention to the table. I will say only what is necessary for the record. The first letter, presented to Miss Hollister in April of 2015, is by forensic paper analysis, written on stock that was manufactured in 2011. It cannot have been written by a woman who died in 26. The second letter, the authentic original, is authenticated by the psychiatrist, who personally witnessed its drafting. I will introduce her sworn affidavit into the record. Celeste's mouth opened. It closed. Mr. Whitfield leaned toward her and whispered something urgent, and she did not appear to hear him. Then Mr. Pendergrass reached for the second slim folder on his right. There is one more matter to enter on the record, he said. Mrs. Hollister has stated publicly, including in this office on the morning of March the 17th, and in a voicemail received by my paralegal earlier this week, that her late husband communicated with her during his final hours. I have here the Mission Hospital admission record from February the 5th, the Asheville Fire Rescue run sheet from the same morning, and the attending physician's notes. Mr. Hollister was unresponsive from the moment of the stroke onward. He never regained consciousness at any point. There was no deathbed conversation. I am entering this for the record. Sloane, who is Holden's wife, stood up from her chair next, gathered her purse, and walked out of the conference room without saying anything to anyone. She did not come back. Holden looked at his mother across the table, and for the first time in the 18 years I had known him, he looked at her like a man finally seeing a woman he had spent his whole life refusing to look at directly. Augusta stood up next. My grandmother was 84 years old. She did not raise her voice, and she did not look at anyone else in the room. Celeste, she said quietly, you will be out of my son's house by the end of next week. I have asked my own attorney to draw up a formal notice, and Mr. Pendergrass has it with him today. The Biltmore Forest house was deeded into my husband's name when he passed in 1991, and it passed to me as his widow. I executed a quitclaim to Theodore in 2010 as a tax planning matter, but I retained a life estate for myself in that deed. My son held the property as a remainder man only. He did not own the house outright. He held it for me. The life estate is mine. I am ending the courtesy. I would like my house back. Celeste had not known. I could see it in her face. She had spent 18 years redecorating a house she had never actually owned, a house she had assumed she would inherit outright on the day her husband died, and the foundation of that assumption had just been pulled out from under her shoes in front of 9 relatives. My Aunt Lorraine, who had sent the 2 heart emojis in the group text after Celeste's message, reached over very quietly and placed her hand on my grandmother's shoulder. It was the first time she had touched her mother in front of the family in many years. I stood up. I reached into my purse and took out the small wooden horse Holden had left on my concrete landing 4 days earlier. The one my father had carved for me out of a piece of black walnut on my 6th birthday. I walked the length of the table and set the horse down on the polished walnut directly in front of Celeste, between her folded hands and her untouched glass of water. I did not raise my voice. "I do not want your apology," I said. "I am not going to give you mine." 2 sentences, nothing more. I walked back to my chair and sat down. She stood up from hers. Nobody stood with her. Mr. Whitfield quietly closed his folder. The meeting ended on its own, without any ruling being issued by anyone, because there was nothing left in the room that required ruling. The truth had walked itself in, and there was no room left for anything else to stand. Mr. Pendergrass filed the civil complaint at the Buncombe County Courthouse on Monday morning. 3 claims and 1 count of restitution: intentional infliction of emotional distress, common law fraud, mail tampering tort under state code, UTMA restitution with statutory interest. Mr. Whitfield called the firm on Tuesday afternoon. His client wished to settle out of court. He asked for our terms. I sat across the desk from Mr. Pendergrass the following Monday morning, while he wrote each term on a yellow legal pad in fountain pen. He did not consult Celeste's attorney about any of the terms. He consulted me. "Disclaim?" he asked. "All of it," I said. He wrote, "Mrs. Hollister disclaims any and all interest in the irrevocable trust dated November the 4th, 2018, and in the Black Mountain property deed recorded April 21st, 2020. The UTMA restitution. Full restitution, plus 8 years of interest at the statutory rate. $58,400, payable in a single sum within 30 days of execution." He paused with the pen above the page and looked up at me. "There is one more clause your father would have wanted me to draft," he said. "I will draft it. You will tell me whether to include it in the final agreement." He drafted it in 2 careful sentences. "Mrs. Hollister shall sign and acknowledge a written declaration that the statements she made on the morning of March the 17th regarding any deathbed communication with the decedent were not factually accurate. This declaration shall be entered into the public settlement file as part of the record of this matter." I read it twice. "Include it," I said quietly. She signed the agreement on the 6th of April in Mr. Pendergrass's office, with the same fountain pen my father had used to sign the trust certification in 2018. The lawyer had laid the pen on the table beside the signature line, without saying a word about its history. She did not ask. She picked it up. She signed. Before we close this story together, I want to say something to you directly, because the ending of what my father built is only a few paragraphs away now, and I do not want you to miss it. If anything I have told you tonight has reminded you of somebody in your own family who has been quietly underestimated by the loudest voice in the room, please share this video with that person tonight, because sometimes a stranger's story is the proof a person needs that they are not the only one. And down in the comments, I would like you to tell me one thing you wish you had known about a person who loved you, much earlier than you actually found out. Your sentence may be the small light that helps another stranger keep walking through their own dark conference room this week. Holden wrote me a short email at the end of March. "Ren," he wrote, "I told her I am out. I have changed my phone number. I am moving to Boone in June. If you ever want to talk, only if you ever want to, my new number is at the bottom of this message. If you do not, I understand entirely. H." He did not sign it, brother. He signed it H. I saved the new number into my contacts under his first name only. I did not text him. Not yet. My grandmother called Mr. Pendergrass on the 1st of April and rewrote her own will from beginning to end. She set aside 60% of her estate to establish a scholarship in my mother's full maiden name, the Juniper Holloway Memorial Scholarship for Early Childhood Educators across Buncombe County. She asked me to serve on the selection committee. I should have done this 20 years ago, she told me. The morning of the 11th of April, Beckett picked me up at my apartment at 9 in the morning. He drove. I sat in the passenger seat of the Tacoma. We took Interstate 40 East out of Asheville, and the drive to Black Mountain is 25 minutes when the road is clear. It was clear that morning. Early spring along the Swannanoa Valley. The dogwoods were just starting to break open against the dark trees. He did not say very much, and I did not either. About 15 minutes into the drive, he reached forward and turned the radio on for the first time since the morning of the will reading. It was a bluegrass station my father had liked very much. He did not say so. I knew. Did you come up here with him often? I asked, when we passed the old fort exit. Once a year, Beckett said quietly. Last weekend of April. He would bring sandwiches. He never said why that specific weekend. I nodded once, and did not explain it to him, because the explanation was not mine to tell out loud yet. My mother had died in late September of 26, but she had asked once during a session, Dr. Mendelsohn had told me on the phone, to have her ashes scattered the following spring at a place that had made her happy. My father had waited the 7 months that first year. He had waited the next 36 years too. Every late April, quietly, alone, with a paper bag of sandwiches and no witnesses. The cabin sits on a small lot off Paget Road, with a row of black walnut trees marking the property line, and a short pebble driveway leading to a wooden porch with 2 steps and a railing my father had built himself when he was 36 years old. The cabin itself is small, 2 bedrooms, a stone hearth, a kitchen with no dishwasher, no television, and no internet. There has never been any need. We arrived at 11:14 in the morning. The first lock turned cleanly under my own house key. The second lock, the one Beckett had carried the key to for the last 6 years, turned with a quiet click underneath my fingers. I went inside alone first. Beckett waited on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets. The air inside the cabin was cold and dry, the way mountain air gets in early spring. The hearth was clean. A small stack of split firewood was laid beside it in the careful arrangement my father had always used. A blue wool blanket was folded on the small couch, corners perfectly square, the way only my father had ever folded a blanket. He had been here in October, before the stroke, and he had folded the blanket himself before he left, knowing he might not come back, and the corners had stayed exactly the way he had set them, for 4 months and 3 weeks. I walked through the cabin slowly, without unpacking anything. I touched the back of the wooden chair he had always sat in by the window. I touched the kitchen counter, where he had made me peanut butter crackers on the afternoon the Polaroid was taken. I touched the windowsill above the kitchen sink, where in that photograph an 11-year-old version of me had once leaned forward to look at a doe walking through the backyard. Then I went outside through the side door to the small garden along the south wall of the cabin. The snowdrops were up. My father had planted them in the spring of 2007, the year after my mother died, because she had once told him during their first winter together that snowdrops were the only flower brave enough to come up before everything else in the world had agreed to let the cold end. He had carved a small wooden marker. The marker read JH 2007 in his careful block letters and had been pushed into the soil at the head of the small strip of white flowers. The snowdrops were a spill of white against the dark earth along the south wall, dozens of them, more than I had expected, and they had come up that spring without anyone telling them to. I knelt down in the cold dirt and touched the wooden marker with the tip of my finger. My fingertip came away with a small smudge of damp soil. I did not wipe it off. I let it stay. When I went back inside, I did 3 small things, in the careful order I had been planning for almost a week. I set the original brown envelope, sealed shut now inside a clear archival sleeve, on the wooden mantel above the stone hearth. I set my mother's real 7-line letter into a plain wooden frame I had found in the kitchen cabinet. I placed the framed letter on the mantel beside the envelope. I set the Polaroid of myself at 11, with my hair in my face and the peanut butter cracker in my hand, on the mantel on the other side of the envelope, so that the 3 objects sat together in a small, careful row. I stood in front of the hearth for a long time. I did not cry. I had cried for 30 minutes in the parking deck of Pack Square on the night Mr. Pendergrass had shown me the Mission Hospital records, and I had let myself understand that my father had never said a single word to anybody at the end. I had cried that one time, and I had decided I was not going to cry again for a long while. I said one sentence aloud to nobody in particular, and to my father at the same time. "Okay," I said quietly into the cold cabin air. "Okay." Then I went back out onto the porch. Beckett was sitting on the top step with his hat balanced on his knee, looking out at the strip of snowdrops along the south wall. I sat down beside him on the wooden step, and we did not say anything to each other for a long time. The light started to change. A wood thrush called somewhere down in the laurel below the cabin. I stood up after a while. I went back inside through the screen door, and I closed the wooden door behind me, and I did not turn the deadbolt. There was no one left in my life that I needed to keep out of this small wooden cabin in Black Mountain. I was 27 years old. My mother had been 32 when she stopped being alive. My father had been 62 when he stopped being alive. I had 35 years on her, and an unmeasured stretch of years still ahead of me. I had no idea what I was going to do with all of those years. I knew only that I was not going to spend a single one of them inside the story Celeste Hollister had written about me for 18 years. I had been told for 18 years that I was hated. I had been loved the whole time. The proof had been waiting in a sealed brown envelope, inside a manila folder, inside a locked drawer, inside an office on Pack Square. The office had been waiting for me. It had taken my father 8 years to build what was inside that envelope. It had taken my uncle 13 years to hold his silence. It had taken my grandmother 84 years to learn what to say, at the right moment in front of the right people. It had taken me 40 minutes to read the letter. I had not been abandoned at any point. I had been protected in a way I had not understood,